Sometimes an interview is it's almost like a deposition.
You want to be authentic and natural and show that you're a good conversationalist, but you also want to be talking about things that are relevant to the job that you're applying for.
You get to ask questions and you have to answer questions. So you're on both sides of the table for it.
Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about the opportunities. Work hard and everything, all the doors will open.
This is Leveraging Latitude, cultivating a full life in the law. Please join us on our journey as we discover how to leverage the hard work of becoming a lawyer to achieving success and leading a rich and fulfilling life in the law. Hello, welcome back to the Leveraging Latitude podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us. And Tim, it's great to be with you again.
Candice, it's great to be with you again. How are you? How are things going?
They're going well. You know, this is a really fun episode that we have coming up because we are going to have the opportunity to talk to one of our Latitude colleagues who has recently joined us and is in the recruiting department, if you will, or on the recruiting side of our business, but has also worn many hats throughout his long career as a former general counsel as well as a job seeker. So today we're going to be talking about looking for jobs, finding jobs, hiring legal talent, and all of the nuances that are involved with those many roles. So would you like to introduce our esteemed guest today, Tim?
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. I'm happy to introduce Jorge de la Osa. He is a director of legal recruiting for Latitude for us out of our Tampa Bay office. So Jorge, welcome.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Candice. How are you guys this afternoon?
Hi, Jorge. We're doing great. Or at least I'm doing great. I shouldn't speak for you, Tim. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm all right.
Jorge, we alluded to the many positions or hats that you've worn over the years. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your career and setting the stage for the conversation that we're about to have? All the many questions that we're going to ask you about it here shortly.
Sure, Candice and Tim. So my career, I was not a traditional go straight out of school into law school. So I actually worked as a business analyst for AT&T for a few years. Then decided I wanted to switch careers and ended up researching and looking into law school. Ended up going to law school. And then from there, I was an associate at Baker & Hostetler, worked in the Orlando office for almost 4 years. And then after some soul searching, decided to go in-house. I enjoyed my time working for AT&T in the business setting. So I always saw myself going back in-house. And I had an opportunity to go in-house with a small development company, resort development company, and I took the chance. And I did that for a couple of years, then switched over to an international development hotel company, large hotel company based out of Spain. There was a unique opportunity that presented itself. I wasn't looking. And as a matter of fact, I was working for somebody who I considered a good friend back from my Baker & Hostetler days. So I felt bad moving, but it was the right career choice. So I made the switch, went in-house. I was pretty much the lead lawyer for that group that was growing their, at the time, the vacation club, Spanish hotel company growing their vacation club internationally. So I had the opportunity to kind of begin and kind of grow that department for about 7 years. The economic crisis kind of hit the hotel industry pretty hard, especially in Europe and Spain. So then we kind of went into kind of a more of a management role. And after a couple of years, Wyndham came knocking, Wyndham Vacation Ownership, and made me an offer as an assistant general counsel position. And I made the jump to them, became their EVP and GC. Worked there for about 7 years. And then it coincided with the spinoff of Wyndham from Wyndham Worldwide. The Wyndham Vacation Ownership kind of went off on its own. And that gave me an opportunity to again jump and look at a different career option with a smaller development company. I always enjoyed the development piece of working in a small growth company. So as soon as I got the offer, I took the chance and went in-house with Blue Green as their general counsel. And at the time, they were kind of stagnant. So they wanted to get kind of to the next level. So they kind of wanted to get into a growth phase, which is what we did for the last 6 years. And in January, found myself out of a job and as a job seeker after we sold Blue Green to Hilton Grand Vacations. So that was the sale that kind of got me back in and looking for a new opportunity. And here I am with Latitude.
We're so happy that you are here with us. And one of the reasons that we were so excited to talk to you is that you have had the unique opportunity to sit at various places within the hiring process, both as a job seeker, as you mentioned, someone contemplating new opportunities that you maybe weren't even looking for, someone who hired legal talent, both attorneys and paralegals, and then also now someone who is assisting both legal employers as well as job seekers as a recruiter. There was something you just said as you were giving us your background or, explaining your career to date. You talked about the fact that you did some soul searching when you first were contemplating leaving the large law firm environment. I'm curious what that entailed or what that looked like. Do you remember some of the questions that you were asking yourself that I'm assuming the answers to those questions helped you to determine that you wanted to move out of the law firm environment and into an in-house role?
So it was a difficult time because I had been or had invested 4.5 years at the law firm. So you get to the point where you're at the crossroads of, am I committing to the partner track? Or am I going to get off the partner track and go in-house with no guarantees? At the time, I had never been in a legal capacity in-house, so with no guarantees of success, and certainly a much different track. Ultimately, you could look at it, and there's many partners maybe in a law firm. There's only one general counsel. So if my goal was ultimately, which it wasn't at the time when I made the jump, but if your goal is to be GC, it's a much maybe tougher road to get there in-house in a sense. And that wasn't, I think part of the decision in soul searching was that wasn't necessarily my end all be all. I didn't jump in-house in order to just say, I'm going to be GC. That was certainly a goal, but it wasn't the biggest reason. And I think that got me comfortable saying this is more, in a sense, a lifestyle change. It was mostly going to be spending more time with my family, having better hours in general in my work life. And that became, I think, once I got very comfortable that's when I was making the move, then the decision kind of followed.
Now, George, is that true necessarily that the lifestyle of an in-house counsel is better than big law? Is that how it turned out for you?
So, Tim, I probably enjoyed 1 year of a really good lifestyle, but certainly once I jumped into a high growth, the hotel company, the international hotel company, that went out the door. I was probably working and traveling certainly more hours than I was at the law firm. So I think that part, although it got me comfortable, maybe making the jump. Obviously, I'd never thought that 2 years later I'd be kind of leading a legal department of a new division in a hotel company, a large hotel company. But certainly, I was comfortable with the decision at the time, and then I was going to make the most of the opportunities as they presented themselves.
How did you do that? So you mentioned, not anticipating that within just a few years you would have the opportunity to sit in a leadership role in-house. What did you do once you made the jump or made the transition in-house that distinguished you among your peers or that showed to other decision makers that you were capable of excelling in a leadership position?
I had, the law firm experience was a great one, and I had great mentors, partners that had been at that law firm and had worked, obviously, have been very successful in their career, and an advice from one of those mentors of mine, and he was a successful partner there at Baker, was, don't worry about the money, don't worry about the opportunities, work hard, and everything, all the doors will open. And that certainly, as simple as that was, it certainly became true. It kind of helped me laser focus on just being a good lawyer, being a good colleague, working hard at whatever it was that I was assigned, and not worrying about who assigned it, what the assignment was. All the other noise kind of goes away, and you just do the best you can, and that certainly helps build your reputation and a little bit of your work ethic and everything else. And sure enough, that managed to open up a lot of doors over the course of my career.
Your career started in giant firm and you moved in-house to small companies, in-house in big companies, and then back again. I don't want you to pick your favorite because I don't think that's fair. But as you think through the roles that you've had in your career, what was the best part of each experience, and what was maybe the least best part of each experience?
I think they're all, Tim, that's a good, a really thoughtful question in a sense, because every one of the experiences are important, right? You go through all these experiences in life, personal or otherwise, business, and they all mean something. You learn from all of them. They're all part of building blocks of where you end up and who you become. And certainly my law firm experience was a great one. We had a great team. It taught me a lot, not just about hard work, but the value of culture. But we had a great leader within that hospitality real estate group, and it taught me a lot. I knew kind of what culture I wanted to carry on later when I became a leader. Then I went in-house and I worked in a different capacity, very smaller group, smaller team, but it became important to get along with the group, right? You don't have the luxury of having 100 people in your department and you can just sit in your office or your cubicle and just do your work. You had to get along with everyone. Otherwise the days would become very, very long and miserable. So I think that taught me, something else. My most favorite, and at the time, not the reason I made the jump in-house, but it was the small growth, or I should say the large hotel company with a brand new division that became a very high growth opportunity where everything was being done from scratch. Kind of the innovation, the challenges, being able to create and develop my own team, all of that became just intoxicating. It was an amazing experience. It was wonderful to go through. Didn't know it at the time, no matter how hard. I mean, I was working long hours and weeks. But it's still, I look back, and that's kind of what I yearned for after I left Wyndham, is that environment. And that's kind of why I jumped later to Blue Green. But that became for sure an environment that I really enjoyed.
Well, let's now talk about your favorite job, which is the one you currently have at Latitude. We mentioned that you are on the recruiting side of our business. Can you tell our audience how in the world you ended up in this role, given all of your prior positions, both at the law firm and in-house with the companies that you've mentioned?
So interesting. Certainly did not think I'd be doing what I'm doing right now. When January came along and we sold the company and I was ready to move on. Immediately you think, okay, well, I'll look for find another general counsel position. And again, it's, I took the time. Luckily, it was the first time I had been in a position where I had nothing. I had a lot of time to sit down and soul search. So I took my time. I had a placement coach that they assigned during the transition, which was great because his general advice was not about, pound the pavement, go out and get. It was much more about take your time, sit down. Jobs at that level are a little bit. It's not like they're a dime a dozen. They're not all sitting there, but those jobs are there. You just have to take your time and figure out exactly what you want, figure out how to connect with the people that have those jobs, listen to other recruiters and what makes you a better candidate. So I took my time. I took 60 days. I think it was, almost a month and a half to sit down, and almost 2 months to sit down and kind of figure out what was my next step. And in one of those searches, I started looking at contract work. Part of my thought process is, let me be open-minded. Let me not just peg myself to what I've always known. Let me be open-minded and see what else there is that I can do at this stage of my career with my experience and my background. And I started looking at contract work. And that led me to, amazingly, one night, I'm just sitting on the computer looking up at contract work, and it led me to Latitude. And I start looking through the website. I started looking at I was curious about what the engagements were in general, not just for me, but just in general, how it worked. And I found myself kind of lost in the Latitude website for over an hour, just looking around, looking at different jobs, looking at the different roles and different recruiters and the people that are involved in everything. Because I had very little experience with contract work or any of these industries. So for me, it was a new world, and I just got lost in it and spent one night kind of looking through it. And then I looked at my market, specifically in the Central Florida, Tampa area, and that's the rest is history. I started looking at contract positions, and then I noticed that there was a director of recruiting position. And I can't say I'd never thought of recruiting, but it wasn't necessarily something that I thought, I'd be doing like immediately right after this hiatus. And I applied to both. I just sent in my resume, and I think within a day I got a call back from Kyle, who's my client partner that I work with.
Well, you mentioned the rest is history. What is it that you do day in and day out? How do you work with many of Latitude's attorneys and clients in your role now?
So we pair the way I guess most of the model works is we're paired with a client partner, and there's obviously we've got a slate of clients, different type of clients, in-house departments, large in-house general counsel groups, or law firms. And we try to then, he'll come to me, we'll try to identify, or he identifies the need. And as simple as I can put it is I try to find the right candidate to fill that need for the client. And both on, obviously experience, background, the hours, the responsibilities, everything has to fit right. So that's where, I'm really enjoying the role that I'm in, because it's not just find a candidate, plug them in. It's much more refined than that. We do a whole lot of work, at least on the candidate side, in making sure that there is a right fit for that role, for that client. And I've always enjoyed doing that as part of when I was growing my legal departments. Is I took a very hands-on approach to the hiring process and growing my groups. So I find this an extension of that. I can take all of my experience where I used to do that back in my days as general counsel, and I can do that for the clients that Kyle has, or any of the other client partners, in trying to find the right fit.
I'm assuming that some of the questions that you ask today are similar to the ones that you asked when you were in-house and you were building a team. You mentioned that you took a very hands-on role when you were in that general counsel seat. Do you remember some of the questions that you like to ask to make sure that you were getting that right fit that we talk about so much?
I was generally one of the last to, once we narrowed the slate down, I was one of the last ones to go through it. But I always interviewed, even whether it be a legal assistant, paralegal, whatever it was. It didn't matter, an attorney. It didn't matter what level it was. I would get involved in the process again, because I wanted to make sure that we had a good fit. And ultimately, the culture is an extension of the leader, the general counsel, in a sense. So I wanted to make sure that continued to permeate through the department. But my interview approach was a much more relaxed approach. So I'd start off by putting the candidate at ease, because I wanted to see, I didn't want somebody who was nervous and kind of ding them on that, or he or she be nervous or something to that extent. I wanted to make sure they got comfortable. So I probably spent the first 10 minutes talking to make sure that we got the butterflies and all the nerves out. Then I would turn it over to the candidate to walk me through their resume. I didn't have candidate questions yet. I didn't do anything at that point. Hopefully, they were not in a calm state. They saw that I wasn't intimidating in any way. And then I would just let them walk me through their resume. And I'd let them be themselves and see what they found important in the resume, what they found important in terms of experience, what they knew about our company, what they knew about, kind of the position. I'd just let them talk for the next 15, 20 minutes. And then I'd get into more formal, maybe questions, in relation to the role. And that was my way of trying to bring out the personality in the candidate as best as I can. And to this day, to your point, I still kind of do that in my pre-screens. I give them background on Latitude. I give them a little bit about myself and what I do and how the process works. And the rest is probably 10, 20 minutes of letting the candidate just be themselves. So I can get a good sense of who they are, how they interact with others, what their social, whether they're extroverts, introverts, that all comes across when you just let them talk. And that's kind of what I try to do. And then I just turn on the ears and just let them do their thing. And then the questions kind of come naturally towards the end.
Sure. To flip that around, how would you advise a candidate to prepare for that type of interview?
I think my advice, and this was true of my interviews, is, when you hear this, it's a two-way street, right? So I was just as concerned of me having and asking the right questions and wanting to understand the fit of the department that I was going into, as it was being prepared for whatever questions. I'd do my research. Like,
you mean as a candidate? I'm sorry to interrupt, but as a candidate. Sure. Okay.
As a candidate, I'd be prepared. And maybe that put me at ease in a sense too, is that I was interviewing the department as well, or whoever it is that I'm meeting. So that kind of put me at ease, that I needed to be prepared in terms of not only the expectations and what the role required, but I also had questions and a set of interests in learning more about the actual leadership of the department, how the hierarchy and responsibilities were set up, what kind of accountability they gave, all of their associates and attorneys. So to me, part of I guess the advice would be to be prepared to do both things, is not only answer the questions, which tends to be maybe a little bit easier, but also be prepared to ask some tough questions and be very, kind of very transparent about what your expectations are for the role and for the department that you want to work for.
So, George, I wonder if you'll go back to your role and experience as a general counsel. And when we talk about team building, there's two kind of functions, and I'll use two different analogies that hopefully clarify where I'm going with this. But one is going to the grocery store, right, and buying the groceries, and you're buying something ultimately to cook, whatever the meal is, right? And the flip side is like a sports analogy. The general manager works out contracts with the players, but the coach is the one that has to make them gel and mesh together. When you think about team building from your general counsel experience, which of those roles is maybe more important or more challenging?
I could try to answer. I think I understand.
Okay, it doesn't matter if I understand it. It only matters if you understand it, George.
This is a meta team building question.
Yeah,
sure.
I'll stay in my lane right over here.
I think I'm going to answer it maybe, kind of in a non-traditional. I think both are important, and it depends on the size of the group, right, Tim? I could afford to be a general manager if I had a strong number two in my group that I knew was, somebody that I had recruited that carried my vision in terms of the culture and everything already there, because I could let them do the day-to-day management, and I could make sure, to your point, on the back end, that after reviewing resumes and stuff, that I put the right slate, and the right pieces. And this was something that I learned in my Wyndham days, which was much bigger organization. Right. The department had over 100 people, 100, but if you count the title department, it was like close to 180 people within just the legal group. So it was huge. So I had to rely on lieutenants to make sure in the different departments. And part of the way I used to do that is make sure that there was a clear reporting line. Everybody knew what the reporting and the accountability and the organizational structure looked like. And through that, I could sleep at night, because then I could let them do the day-to-day coaching. To your point, I could let them do the day-to-day coaching while I did more of the general manager duties. Now, I think they're still both important. If you don't have that set up yet, or if it's a very small group, which was the case later, obviously when I joined the startup division, there I'm kind of doing both. I'm making sure I'm coaching the people coming in. At the same time, I'm working through and instilling and trying to set up my org chart the way I want to do it. So I think both of them. And then on top of that, you add the additional layer of making sure you're practicing law and advising executives and everything else. It's kind of a multi-layered, obviously a multi-layered responsibility that you end up when you end up at a GC role.
Yeah, of course. It's one of those things that, obviously I'm going to use my cooking analogy again. Like, better ingredients leads to a better meal, but at some point you got to use what you got and maximize whatever that is. Both skills are important. I was interesting to hear you talk about balancing both of those requirements of the job.
Yeah, George, I'm curious how you fall on this question, because this is a conversation I have with a lot of our clients who we are assisting with the hiring process, whether through, short-term or flexible contract engagements or permanent hiring. Employers tend to fall in one of two categories. One is, I am hiring for experience. I want someone with these particular skills who has worked in this particular field or is an expert in this particular area of law. Then the other, and often this is in-house for a more general role, so not necessarily a top-tier law firm partner who is intended to specialize, but someone who's more of a utility player or business partner. So you have hiring for experience versus or hiring for personality. I want someone who's gritty, who's not going to stop until they find the right answer, who is curious, who can communicate well up and down the hierarchy of the business. What camp do you fall in, or do you prioritize one over the other? I mean, obviously, I know you'd like to have both. But when you are looking for that match or that good fit, if you are the one hiring or when you were the one hiring, which were you prioritizing?
For me, it was the latter. It was the grittiness. It was the personality. It was all the intangibles that are very hard to build into somebody after the fact. For me, a lot of it was also driven by the in-house client. My in-house clients were all very different. They had their own personality and quirks. So if the head of real estate for the development company was a certain way, and I knew he was going to clash with somebody who was, either too lighthearted or whatever, then I'd make sure that my recruiting was tailored more towards that personality. I think everybody that's already coming out of this profession as a JD, I start from the fact that they can learn, they're intelligent. Now I've got to make sure I fill in the intangibles that are very hard to build into somebody after the fact. You certainly can't change a lot of those personality traits after somebody has started working. I mean, it's important, obviously, to have the right fit and culture, but if it's also not the right fit with the client, I call them clients, but they're really colleagues, but in-house clients, if they're not going to be the right fit or they require a particular personality, I'm going to try to find that.
In a former episode, one of our guests, Mike Haven, referred to those intangibles as power skills, right? Communication, grit, resilience. How do you assess for those power skills? And then again, on the flip side, as the job seeker, how do you give examples or show a potential employer that you have them?
So not easy. Obviously, I think it's the hardest part. The hardest part of an interview is trying to flesh that out. I think I alluded to it earlier, Candice, when I said, I let the candidate talk for however long, 10, 20 minutes, however long they want to, in a sense, to draw out the personality, find out what their curiosity, find out as much as I can. And hopefully it's not all just canned questions and go up and down the resume, because that tells you something too. So I try to get it by just being quiet in the interview and trying to, let them do their talk. It's hard because the other part of it is, and it may not come out in that one interview. I try not to just do one interview because somebody can always blow one interview. I try it to be a multiple interview process where you have multiple interviews so that you can get different people, different levels, and try to assess a little bit more of the personality that way. If I can even do a lunch interview or coffee or something like that, I like to do that because you get to see the interaction, also the interpersonal skills and the interaction person to person, which is getting harder and harder nowadays with everything video. But I think that's my number one. I think that's what I do in terms of, as the hiring, on the hiring side. As in terms of the candidate, the only thing you can do is, again, you want to have the right fit. So all you can do is try to be yourself. Don't change your style. Don't try to, overemphasize something that you're not necessarily strong at or whatever it is. Be yourself. Be completely transparent, honest. And if you've got the curiosity to learn, say that, but don't say that you're an expert in, in SaaS contracts when you've only done one in your entire career. So I think try to, as best you can, be yourself. Remember, the interview goes both ways. So that should take some of the pressure off. If it's not meant to be, or if the fit is not right, you want to know right from the beginning, not later, much later in the process.
Absolutely. And I will often tell job seekers to, as part of their preparation, is to catalog or bank some stories that show a time when they were curious, a time when they successfully led others, a time when they showed grit, a time where they communicated effectively across the company, not so that they can, in the 30 minutes they may have with a would-be employer, rattle through all of these stories, but so that they have them kind of, within reach. They have access to those stories so that they can pull one out. If someone does say, well, tell me about some of your power skills, or tell me about a time when you showed leadership. And that is a way that you can prepare for interviews as well, especially high-level interviews where those power skills may be even more crucial. And my own experience has showed me that not every conversation is a successful interview. So I had an experience once when I was a young lawyer. In fact, I was in law school. I'm telling on myself here. This is many, many years ago. I've learned a few things since then, but I remember doing an on-campus interview where I was talking to a large firm partner, and he noticed in my resume that I had spent the summer before law school as a photographer. Back in the day, my father owned a photography business, and this is when not everyone had a camera in their back pocket, with their phone, and we would take little league pictures and that type of thing. And so this attorney asked me a question about taking pictures, and it led to a wonderful conversation, at least from my perspective, where we talked for 30 minutes about my experience as a little league photographer. And I did not get a callback interview. And what I learned from that experience was that even though that was a great conversation, I had not given him any reason to call me back. I gave him lots of reasons why he might want to hire me for his son's, little league picture photo shoot. But I hadn't given him any reason to think that I would be, a great associate at his law firm. And so you want to be authentic and natural and show that you're a good conversationalist, but you also want to be talking about things that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. And thinking about some of those stories or some of those examples beforehand, I think that could be helpful, especially if you get in there and you're a little nervous, or you might be expected to lead the conversation a little bit. You can pull those stories out.
To follow that up, that thought process, it would be you won't forget if somebody's, you've got your 20 minutes to go through your resume, and all of a sudden you're not just going line by line. You basically have picked out something that's relevant to the role. There's a role responsibility or something that's important, and you've tied it to that story, right? You pulled it out of the resume, but you've also tied it to a story where you showed, perseverance, grit, or whatever that requirement is. That's something that's exactly what I look for if you're on the hiring side of a candidate that has the ability to translate and not just communicate their experience, but communicate it in a way that then resonates and you kind of remember for a long time.
Yeah, Candice, I was going to piggyback on your story just to say I think there's a place for stuff like that, depending on where you are in the interview process. Like if you're interview 7 or 8 and you've had all of those different stories, part of the and I'm emphasizing a part of the process is to show that you're a fit personally, in addition to professionally and with your skill set and personality wise. And so if you've got a common interest with somebody, I don't think there's any harm taking maybe 3 or 4 minutes to share that interest. But I think
not the whole interview. That's the point there. Don't think that just because you're talking and you're having a good conversation that it means you've sold yourself and you're getting the job offer. There are those nuances. Again, I was not an experienced interviewee or interviewer. I don't know which side of which one I was at that point, but I've learned from that experience as well as many others. But there is a time and place, as with all things, and then also you have to be cognizant of how much is packed into those 30-minute conversations or 1-hour conversations. And as you mentioned, whether this is a coffee versus the 7th interview that you've now had with the same person. So all things to just kind of be swirling around in your head, both in preparation for an interview as well as while you are in it. Just being cognizant of maybe this story has run its course. So,
Candice, to that point, I had a candidate just recently who hit it off phenomenally well with a client. Now, it was a happy ending, but the interview was 90 minutes. Now, I think I would tell a candidate, just be mindful of how much time you have, because if they've allotted and the general counsel is telling you he's got 30 minutes, you don't want to have a 30-minute conversation about, you're growing up in the same, city.
Right.
But if the general counsel has an hour and a half to give, then by all means, obviously the connection is important, but you better get to also the fact that you've got to prove that you can do the job.
I think some of the best, and I did some litigation back in my practicing days, but the clearest way to think about it sometimes in interview is it's almost like a deposition, a friendly deposition where you get to ask questions and you have to answer questions. So you're on both sides of the table for it. But, you always go into a deposition with goals and you try to get as many of those goals accomplished as possible. Because depositions are time too. There's a lot more time and there's a lot more specificity that you have to get to. But just going into it with 3 or 4 goals and then being conversational and open-minded and listening to the other side so that they can accomplish their 3 or 4 goals as well. I think that's a good interview.
Good point. George, as you look back over your career and also consider the work that you're doing now with Latitude, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give to the person sitting in the hiring seat? And then what is a piece of advice that you would give to the person who is being interviewed?
So I think if you're in the hiring, if you're on the hiring side, I think my advice is allow the candidate to have time to kind of decompress at the beginning of the interview, and then let them be themselves for a while. I think and I've been through a lot of interviews personally where you go into 20 questions one after the other, and you don't get a chance to necessarily show yourself or your personality. If that's important to you, I think you've got to give them the chance, to be themselves for a little while. Maybe that's kind of it's obviously the way I interview, but maybe not to everyone. A lot of people are more formalized in their interview process, but I like to have at least a good 5-10 minutes of letting the candidate do their thing, and that way you get a good sense of who they are. Advice for the candidate is go. I think be careful going in full of expectations. I think Tim's right. I think you come up with your goals. I think you have an open mind about the role, in a sense, because I think coming in with preconceived notions, whether you think, oh, I'm never going to get that, or whether it's oh my gosh, my resume is so good, it's going to be a slam dunk. I think you kind of set yourself up for failure or success based on the attitude you take into the interview. So I say go in there a little bit humble, but also open-minded. Learn about the role, be interested in not just in going through and talking about yourself, but be interested in the culture, the fit, the people. Get a little bit more of those power skills. At least find out how the person that you're talking to feels about those power skills and how they maybe see them within the team or they don't. But I think take the time to go through and allow the interview to kind of take its course without prejudging. Oh my gosh, I bombed that question or I bombed this question. You never know. At the end of the day, you never know even if you feel you didn't do well, you could have nailed it and been fine with it. So I think you just go in and be as confident as you can, but at the same time, be open-minded about the process and let it carry out.
I do think that's so important to approach the interview from both sides as an honest conversation where both sides are trying to determine whether it's a good match.
Right.
So it's not one person trying to impress another person or one person trying to trip up the other person or uncover, a secret stash of ingredients that will automatically suggest that this interviewee is the right person for the job. It really is about entering into it with the mutual goal of determining whether this is a good match. Because if it's not, it's obviously not going to work well for either side if it's not working well for one side. And, we have found, you don't have to do this job for very long to recognize that lawyers are extremely bright. And a lot of times they know what the quote unquote right answer is for some of those canned questions that we all expect. And so they will have worked out their answers to those questions ahead of time where you really get to know someone is in the conversation. So I love your advice about starting the interview gently and letting someone kind of reveal who they are, and then once they're comfortable, asking them more about their experience and listening for some of those power skills or the intangibles, the soft skills that you mentioned, that are so critical.
Yeah, especially for, lawyers interviewing other lawyers, knowing your audience too. An HR professional podcast might have totally different advice for their crew on, just the way that they've got to do their interviews too.
I do have one last question. When is it appropriate for a job seeker to reach out to someone like you, a recruiter, for assistance?
Well, my advice to my kids is, in a sense, you're always looking for your next job, right? You need to keep. I think you need to keep a pulse on the industry. If you're a lawyer, you need to keep a pulse on the industry you're in, and always look for opportunities. The opportunities may not always find you, but if you're prepared for it, and all of a sudden you are looking and you find it, it may be a good time for you to make the move, right? So I think you stay prepared. I think you see what's out there. You look at who's hiring, and it's not that you're dissatisfied. I think some people say, well, I'm not looking because I'm happy with what I have. It's not about that. It's a little bit about, maybe to Tim's point, what's down the road? What do you want to be doing in 5 years? You don't know unless you're keeping a pulse on what's out there. So I think it's important for attorneys, for candidates, for anyone to keep an eye out with what's going on in the industry. Our website's easy because we obviously have clients in a bunch of different industries. So you can always be looking at it. It doesn't mean anything, and you never know what's out there. But I think you might find something you'd be surprised that might all of a sudden pique your interest, and there might be, a great fit there. I was never afraid to make the jump. Some people, I think, are, and it goes against human nature maybe to make the change. I think part of my advice is don't be afraid to keep looking, because you just never know what's out there. And it doesn't mean you're committed. It means, I think, you're smart if you're keeping your pulse on what's out there and what may be available.
And I think it also can make you a better leader if you are in that position in your current job, right? To know what the market is, to know what it might take to add to your team, or what some of your team members might be considering, so that you can remain relevant and make sure that you're keeping your great talent on board too. So I think that's great advice. It's just about being aware, not necessarily looking. And I know that's a great time, typically, to have a conversation with a recruiter when you're not necessarily desperate to make a move, but where you can ask some thoughtful questions and mull over the answers and do that soul searching that you mentioned a couple of times to see if a move might be right at some point. Well, thank you so much, George, for sharing your story and your career with us. We're so happy that you're with us at Latitude, and you're helping so many attorneys find that right match. We appreciate the practical advice.
It's been great. It's been great joining you guys. I appreciate the time and obviously the topic.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found this content valuable, please tell a friend or colleague about us. Also, if you can, please give us a rating and a short review on your podcast listening platform. The more ratings and reviews we have, the more people will find us. If you have a question, reach out to us at latitudelegal.com.